Hi, everybody. Welcome to our lecture on biomolecules. Biomolecules uh, can be referred to as macromolecules. Uh, Generally speaking, the molecules that life is made up of, are large molecules, and they're polymers more often than not uh, at some level. When you think about macromolecules, I want you to think about a chain of beads. A polymer is a chain of beads, just like a chain of beads you might wear around your neck. And sometimes those chains of beads can be made up of beads of the same type. Sometimes they're different kinds of beads, but it's a good analogy for helping you understand the relationship of these large complex molecules uh, and their subunits. Okay, and so we're going to limit our scope to the four major classes of biologically active macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. There's others out there, but we're going to look at these guys. So, what is a polymer? A polymer is a chain of monomers, right? Um, and at the top we can see the actually a nucleic. I'm sorry, an amino acid. It's going to be joined to another amino acid, and these guys often undergo what's called dehydration synthesis to form these chains. It happens when we build polysaccharides, it happens when we build proteins, it happens when we build nucleotides, it happens when we build lipids as well. So dehydration synthesis is really critically important in understanding how polymers form from monomers. And it's pretty straightforward. We're going to see examples of it over and over again. And I'll go into a little detail when we get to that place. Um, and anyway, in short, biochemistry is the study of these biomolecules. And we're going to start today's discussion with carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, aka sugars, have a lot of roles. All the energy that is generated in your body to do useful work is in the end taken from carbohydrates. Um, the 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 process occurs in the mitochondria, and the chemical process is called cellular respiration, right? And the fuel for cellular respiration is carbohydrates. One way or another, where they're talking about fats get converted into these carbohydrates to be used, um, or proteins, whatever you're digesting. In the end, it's all about sugar. So that's a good starting point for us. Um, I think in every bio course you get a superficial treatment of the cell respiration process. I think we are going to skip it this time for you guys. I can hear a collective sigh of relief. I'll ask you a few questions about it. We're going to talk about sugar all year, though. And we already have. We've talked about the role of glucose metabolism in maintaining homeostasis. So when I say carbohydrates, I want you to think about glucose. All right, that's the king of the carbohydrates from our physiological standpoint. Of course, we've already talked about how glucose in animals can be stored as a molecule called glycogen. All right, so when I think about carbohydrates, I can think about energy now in the form of glucose, or I can think about energy storage and as we see in glycogen. Now, there's other forms. Let's take a look. So, um, again, glucose is useful for energy now, and then glycogen is useful for energy storage, and then last but not least, some cells actually are made of carbohydrates. All right, you aren't, but some other animals do have structural carbohydrates, and of course, plants are made of sugar. That's right, wood is cellulose, which is made of glucose. Um, all the carbohydrates have the generic formula C to the N, H to the 2N, O to the N, right? So if you have one carbon, you'd have two hydrogens and one oxygen. And of course, glucose's formula is C6H12O6. We have monosaccharides like glucose and fructose that are made up of single sugars or simple sugars. We have disaccharides like sucrose or lactose. And then last but not least, polysaccharides refer to those large molecules of sugars like glycogen, cellulose, chitin. So let's look at these monosaccharides. In order to get energy now, we rely on glucose. And there's some other sugars that can be turned into glucose readily, like fructose or even the disaccharide sucrose. Here's glucose. Notice it's in a ring structure. In fact, often if we'll just simply represent glucose as a hexagon. It does have a significant structural formula. There are a number of these hydroxyl groups, and their location really identifies glucose and other closely related isomers of glucose. So there's our glucose molecule. You can see it's got it's a hexagon, but it's not made up of 6 carbons in the ring. There's 6 carbons, but there's an oxygen in the ring. Similar, here's fructose. It's a pentagonal structure. This is fruit sugar, also containing an oxygen in the ring. And glucose can actually exist as just a chain, So I showed you the chains of our hydrocarbons in yesterday's discussion. Sucrose can exist simply as a chain of 6 carbons that rolls into itself. So there's a bunch of different forms of glucose. One of the things you can see here, though, is the formation of a bond between glucose and fructose to form sucrose. Originally, these guys have an OH here, and there's an OH here, and they can give up that OH to form a bond just between an oxygen there. And in the meantime, what they've lost is a water molecule, and that's dehydration synthesis. Okay, so here's another static version of that where you could take glucose and sucrose and turn it into, glucose and fructose and turn it into sucrose. So we got monosaccharides and disaccharides, both that are useful for energy right now. Of course, another thing that carbohydrates are useful for is for energy storage. And so I can make long chains of carbohydrates. And in animals, of course, we make glycogen. And so glycogen is this long branching chain of glucose molecules. These are all just little hexagons of glucose. Here's another, a lower magnification, if you will, diagram here. These chains of these hexagons, glucose. Now, importantly, these guys have a bond called the alpha-1,4 glycosidic linkage, okay? And they also have another bond, but in short, this alpha-1,4 glycosidic linkage is the bond that enzymes in your body, like alpha dehydrogenase attack or amylase attack. So both starch and glycogen have the alpha-1,4 glycosidic linkage, and it has to do with the location of this oxygen. On the other hand, I can have structural polysaccharides, like cellulose or chitin. Now, cellulose is what paper's made up of. Cellulose is what wood's made up of. Chitin is what the exoskeleton of all the insects are made up of. And the difference between the two is that they're both made of glucose, but instead of an alpha-1,4 glycosidic linkage, you've got a beta-1,4 glycosidic linkage. And so you can't eat cellulose because you lack enzymes that can attack that specific bond. You can eat bugs. I don't know if you digest their chitin, but that's a good question to look into. All right. So anyway, these polysaccharides are long chains, and one of the things that differentiates, say, starch and glycogen is the side branching chains. I wouldn't expect you to know that, but I would expect you to know that I can have polysaccharides made up of exactly the same monomers, right? We're just talking about chains of glucose that can be used as a cell energy storage. In plants, they make starch. In animals, it's glycogen. Or if I switch the bond angle, I end up with polysaccharides made of glucose that form wood, all right? So think of that. Or bug scales, or bug skeleton. Well, in summary, right, so they're the major source of energy for I guess most organisms, right? If you're a heterotroph, you're going to do cellular respiration, and that means if you're a bacteria, you'll do cell respiration, and and if you're going to do cell respiration, you're going to have the same genes that I have, more or less. You're going to be able to break down glucose into its constituents, and so that homology, that commonality that we see, everything from you to the bacterium, points to the fact that we're all come from the same place. Um, and so I can use energy now. I can store energy, and again, I can be made of this stuff. So here's a sweet, I guess a dragonfly nymph, terrifying exoskeleton made of chitin. Oh, mushrooms. These guys, they're not plants, guys. Remember, these are heterotrophs. They're eating other stuff. Also, mushrooms are made of chitin. Huh. Didn't I forgot about that. Anyway, so I guess you can digest it. But that's about it for carbohydrates, and it seems like enough info for one little unit. So I will see you on the other side.